Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Talking a lot about the things that very seriously affect us this morning here in this country. Just talked to Franz Jaeger about our America's Best Days behind us. One of the things we're dealing with right now in trying to decide what our best days are and how we're going to deal with the world around us is the idea of ISIS. And where will the next attacks come? And the idea of terrorism in general. We saw the Parliament area attacked in Canada this week. We saw another guy attacked the other day with an axe. We're seeing 3 girls get taken off an airline the other day because they were heading to help ISIS. What's causing a lot of this? Dr. William Forstchen is a military history expert, New York Times best-selling author. He's written a brand new book called The Day of Wrath. Are we prepared for a war where the target won't necessarily be military bases, but maybe schools and hospitals? It's a big question. With us this morning is Dr. Forstchen to try to answer that. Dr. Forstchen, great to have you on the show. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. Glad to be with you, even though we're going to be talking about a grim subject.
Well, you know what, though? We're faced with realities right now, and they are grim subjects. But, I think we need to raise at least the possibility of what's out there. And you shed kind of a critical light on this whole thing in your book. Tell us a little bit about what prompted you to write the book, although I think a lot of people have been quietly kind of thinking about this for a while.
Well, as you were leading into introducing me, you already presented the major point. Are we prepared for this type of situation? And my response is no. One, when are we going to wake up to the fact we are in a full-scale war? It's a different type of war than World War II. It is a war that's actually going to hit inside the continental United States. And our enemy, ISIS, they make Al-Qaeda, they're like our grandparents' terrorists.
Yeah.
Al-Qaeda is a very media-savvy, social media-savvy organization. Now look at the turmoil and the reaction triggered by what we could call lone wolf attacks. That means ISIS sympathizers. What's going to happen when ISIS-trained professionals cut loose inside the United States? And they're going to go for our soft targets, not for the hard military targets, like that killer in Ottawa. He ran straight into a phalanx of police.
Right.
Suppose you hit a school instead.
It's interesting. We talked about this before, and I've raised the question. You're almost afraid to raise the question because someone out there will go, oh, hadn't thought about that. But the idea of, they go and hit these big places. We saw what happened with the bringing down of the World Trade Center. We saw what happened with all the destruction around there. We saw what happened with the attack at the Pentagon. These are all pretty big attacks. But I thought to myself, what would spread more terror in this country than if you started to attack, let's say, a mall, a football game, on a Saturday afternoon with 100,000 people in a stadium? What would happen if you attacked a hospital? What would happen if you attacked, some kind of gigantic area where people were at, where the randomness of it now kind of involves everybody in the country? I've often thought about that, and obviously you took that on in your book.
Well, let me emphasize, Day of Wrath is a novel. Because a lot of times, using a novel, one can convey a concern. George Orwell's 1984 or Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, and I don't dare compare myself to those two great classics. The novel is about a teacher with a child, goes to an ordinary day in an ordinary school in Maine, and then that is the school that is hit by ISIS. I based this story on a reality. In 2004, Islamic terrorists hit a school in Russia. You can look it up on Wikipedia. It's Beslan.
I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. Not many Americans do remember. I'd say 90% don't even remember it.
Yeah.
Over 300 children were murdered at that school.
Yep.
We're used to the Columbine scenario, and that's a horrible thing to say, isn't it? We're used to the Columbine scenario of a couple of very psychotic kids. But instead, imagine 3 to 5 trained killers walk into a school, ignore this is a no-gun zone sign, and then systematically go from room to room to room. At the school in Connecticut, 20 children died.
Yeah.
But over 400 survived. Imagine a school where no children survive.
Exactly. And you talk about one of my favorite subjects, of these no whatever signs, no drug zone, no gun zone, and it's like, and I said, has anybody ever thought about the silliness of this? And you've kind of alluded to it, that you're walking in, you're getting ready to slaughter, a whole lot of people, and all of a sudden you see this no gun zone, you go, oh my God, darn it, what happened? Yeah, I got to leave. I can't do it here. It's a no gun zone. And that kind of hits a point here. have we gotten to a point of silliness with how we decide that we're going to defend people? And your point that you made in your novel here, the idea that here's a little girl going off to school on a given day. I mean, think about this with regard to the World Trade Center. Who thought when they went to work at the World Trade Center that day that was it? That was the last day? Or who thought that when they went to any one of a number of places right now, this sergeant at arms the other day went to work out in front of the Parliament. Who thought that might be his last day? We hear that all the time, and yet it's an entirely new world that we deal in. Does your novel kind of get to that point that we're living in a new world? We got to live in a new way at all? Does it portray that at all?
Yeah, well, absolutely yes, in many ways, because let's even just go back to 9/11 and think about the cell phones we were carrying that day. They carried voice. Very few had the ones that could convey pictures. Now, the terrorists of Al-Qaeda hit the perfect target. New York City, every major network's there. Every major network had cameras on the site within a matter of a minute. Today, all of us can link to the world in a matter of seconds, including, this is the key thing, including the terrorists themselves.
Right.
And you hit it exactly. Go for the jugular. Make every American afraid. Hit a small school outside of York, Pennsylvania. Hit a hospital somewhere outside of Hickory, North Carolina. Instantly, it will be on the news within a minute or two. And then ISIS itself will use that same video showing their triumph and how they've brought America down. There would be a nationwide panic. We got to be ready for this before it happens, not afterwards. Just a very quick point. Some people might remember that wonderful movie Pearl Harbor, the the original one.
Watched it, yep. Many times.
Where the guys pick up on the radar screen that this is true. They actually picked up on radar the inbound Japanese attack. They called into headquarters, and the officer at headquarters said, don't worry about it, and hung up. Mm-hmm. We're at that moment right now. And we have government officials who are saying, we got the situation under control. Yeah, well, they sure had the situation under control in New York City before yesterday, didn't they?
Right.
Don't worry about it.
Right. And now we got Ebola, and there's people riding on subways, and, you're afraid to shake hands anymore. You're in a bowling alley somewhere where this guy was.
And this was a doctor.
Yeah, and it's a doctor. And you say, wasn't he responsible? Shouldn't he be quarantining himself or doing something like that? And, so we have, you walk out on a given day now, it kind of reminds me of the Israelis a little bit. The Israelis are under attack all the time. They live a new way. I mean, I won't say they're fatalistic, but at least they're out there with the idea that, today could be a bomb could be flying in here, something could be happening, but we want to live in a way where we are proactive and kind of getting out in front of this stuff as much as humanly possible.
Well, Hamas, the war against Hamas this summer that the world was condemning while Israel was struggling to stay alive, and at the same time the world ignoring the murders in Iraq, they were digging tunnels wholesale, and some of those tunnels were located near Israeli schools.
Right, exactly.
Israeli teachers, every Israeli teacher is trained, and is trained well. Somebody sent me a video a couple months back. Oh, Bill, this is a great idea. It's a new system how to lock your classroom door.
Right.
And the person demonstrating it is standing next to a window.
Yeah.
Duh. The door is locked. The terrorist just shoots the window out and climbs into your room anyhow.
Where do we ever get, and I'm straying away from your novel, I'll come back to that. Where do we ever get this idea where we lost our common sense and we start to say, well, they'll never do this. They'll never do that. Nobody ever thought we'd get attacked on 9/11 either. Nobody ever thought back in 1993 that anybody would bomb the World Trade Center, but they did. Nobody ever thought that people would run a boat into the USS Cole and blow a hole in the side of it, but they did. No one ever thought that 400 kids would get killed in Russia by some people who would be totally heartless, but they did. Nobody ever thought we'd see kids and adults hanging on upside down on crosses in Iraq, most recently with ISIS, but we do. So we look at all this and we say, where did we become so naive, Bill?
Well, I think a lot of your listeners, by the way, I'm really enjoying interviewing with you because you're hitting the point. Remember about a year or two ago, the guy put up a lawn sign that said, Second Amendment house, I'm armed, and then the arrow said, my neighbor's a liberal?
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember it.
Okay, imagine you and an ultra-liberal neighbor are going home, and you're hearing gunfire from a new guy that's moved in across the street. and the two of you peek over the wall, and the guy is shooting at targets of you and your liberal neighbor and screaming curses at him.
Right.
What would you do?
Yeah, I'd be proactive.
What would the liberal do? Oh, maybe I can reason with him.
Yeah, his childhood must have been poor, or he's got some issues. Maybe his family doesn't like him. Maybe they had an argument. I'll go over and try to talk to him a little bit.
I'll go talk to him for a while, and your response will be, okay, you talk to him, I'm going to go home, I'm going to get ready.
Yeah.
Well, we got to go home, we got to get ready. We got to stop listening to this. Do you have a Tourette syndrome button there? Because I was about to say a bad word.
Yeah, don't do that. We do have that button, but don't do that. Yeah.
I used to have my own radio show more than once. I had to self-censor.
You know about that, yeah. I got it. Well, it was interesting. You've heard of Dr. Walter Williams, right?
Yes.
He's a regular guest on our show. He kind of drew the same scenario one time. He said, if your neighbor is sitting next door and he's building a cannon and he's pointed out the window at your house, you don't wait for him to use the cannon before you go over and do something about it. And you're saying the same thing here. I mean, and yet there's an argument being made by people that says, oh, you can't do that. My God, you're taking away their rights to kill you. I mean, what are you doing? Come on. It's almost gotten to that point of silliness in the conversation in the country.
Just look at the way Ebola has now come into the country twice. And, this is like a duh moment. Quarantine. Again, I'm a film fan. Remember Godfather 2?
Absolutely.
Little Don Corleone shows up at Ellis Island and they go, Mom, you have smallpox, you're in quarantine for 3 months.
You have a picture of him sitting there longingly looking out the window at the Statue of Liberty. But, yeah, that's exactly right.
I get enraged when I'm hearing them say, well, this is a new situation and we'll have to develop the procedures as we go. Again, hit the delete button because I was about to say another word. But
right.
We had those procedures in place 120 years ago of how to handle people coming in from infectious areas, and it worked. It stopped typhoid, typhus, smallpox, plague. We were doing this up until current times, and now it seems like political correctness is going to be the death of us.
Well, and I
don't want to offend people.
It's the idea that instead of looking at the very worst possible scenario, we look at the very best. If I get on board a ship, okay, and they come and they say, okay, we're going to have the safety exercise where you put on the thing, the things that are going to keep you afloat, the life vests and so forth. When they do that, they're not preparing for the best case scenario. They're preparing for the worst. And the worst is, guess what? Ship might sink. You might have to float in the water for a while. You might have to get in a lifeboat. But we're getting ready for the worst. Now, you're sitting there going, this will never happen. Anybody read the Titanic, okay? The point is that you prepare for the very worst. When we talk about Ebola, why would you say, well, everything's under control? The CDC made us feel like, it's a day at the beach. And all of a sudden, well, it wasn't under control. We didn't have the right kind of gowns on. We're letting people travel in an airplane across the country who's been under scrutiny, under watch.
That was insanity.
And you go, what are we doing? Why would we take a chance with people's lives? And to me, that shows a total disregard for our security, which is the number one thing that is supposed to be at risk here in our country right now. And again, I think you point to that here in your book and also in some of your comments.
Well, one of the things that just to push that a bit further that totally enrages me is the very people who lecture to us constantly about, oh, you shouldn't have guns, you shouldn't have this, you shouldn't have, like the mayor of New York, and yet you see him walking down the street, he's got 20 armed guys around.
Yeah, exactly. Or try to break into the White House. Well, not recently, but try to break into that's called now, by the way, going over the front fence is called a White House tour. But they caught somebody the other day. If I've been inside the White House lawn, I got news for you. If fences don't work and if weapons don't work, then the White House is the biggest hypocrisy that I've ever seen. You've got people on the roof with guns, you got dogs, you got fences that are up there, and you say, oh, well, they seem to work most of the time until recently. So why wouldn't we do that with our country, not only the physical way, but also in other ways to make sure that the things like you're talking about in your novel here don't happen, where schools are attacked, where the regular person can go to a mall. And yet we see out here in real society, if we go into a public place like a football stadium or like a museum or different places like that, those people are going about doing the right things by checking to see what you got, what's going on, what are your intentions, right?
Well, when I started writing Day of Wrath in the middle of June, conversation with fiance, and she pushed me over the edge and said, Bill, you got to write about this. And I used the Beslin scenario to try and convey a serious warning. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this now is I started working on that book in June. It was released on August the 17th. And how quickly the entire paradigm is changing. I was focusing in on armed gunmen, which we do know have infiltrated in. And then a week ago, I added a little essay to my website, dayofwrathbook.com. All ISIS has to do is take 3 of its suicide killers, inject them with Ebola, and tell them, go hang out in Times Square, go hang out in Grand Central Station, go hang out in the major train station in Philadelphia until you collapse.
Yeah.
So they're going to weaponize Ebola. I'm convinced they will weaponize Ebola. They're coming for us, and we're not doing anything. But the elite leadership, they'll be protected. Of course, they'll be protected.
For a while. So take me through and I don't want to give away the whole book, for heaven's sakes. I mean, you got to buy it, right? Where can people buy a book, by the way?
Oh, you can pick it up anywhere now. It originally came out as an ebook, so go to any of your better-known distributors. I mean, I'm not supposed to point out that Amazon is one of them, but you can go to Amazon, B&N, iTunes for the ebook, or you can simply go to any bookstore. You can order the paper edition, and the audio edition is coming out now as well. But, you can get the book almost anywhere. You
said something interesting in the, talking about the introduction of Day of Wrath. You said, if I don't want to write, I did not want to write this book. But as I expressed to my friends, I feared that if I did not write it, and this nightmare happened, which it really can, I would be responsible in some way for remaining silent. If you read on from here, it will not be an enjoyable experience in the Day of Wrath introduction. And people are, I think you hit a point. People are afraid to talk about this stuff because, and yet we all have thought about it, I think, on some level at some point in time. But we're going to come back and get more into why you wrote about it and the responsibility that you take. And I think it's a good one. We're talking this morning with Dr. William Forstchen, who is the author of Day of Wrath. Yeah, and it is it's a book that'll wake you up here. It's a novel, but it also hits the present-day topics that are around us. All here on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show with Dr. William Forstchen, who I've taken the liberty of calling Bill this morning. I hope it's not too bad. But he's written a great book called Day of Wrath. It's an ebook that's out there. It's a novel. It's a work of fiction, and yet at the same time it's based around, and these are the books I most love, it's based around present-day happenings, and I suspect after he wrote it, and we'll ask him that question right now, Bill, after you wrote this, you had to be struck, and you said there was a change of paradigm right away that kind of just fed right in, almost made the conclusion of your book even longer, right?
It was a tough one, and as the opening line of my forward, I didn't want to write this book.
Right.
I literally did not want to. I was going to take the summer off. I just gotten engaged. We were just going to relax and travel and have a good time. And suddenly, I'm hunched over the keyboard for another 6 or 7 weeks.
There we go to Godfather 3. I tried to get out, and they pull me back in.
That's right. I actually said that. I was actually going, I tried to get out, they keep pulling me back in again.
That's exactly right.
I felt this responsibility. Every American should be standing up and hollering their head off right now that, for heaven's sake, we are at war.
Yeah.
This is war.
Well, and it's not. Well, we got to think about it today to see. I was struck the other day when the sergeant of arms got attacked up near the Parliament in Ottawa, and immediately the Prime Minister comes out and said, "This is an act of terrorism." And President Obama saying, "Well, we'll decide tomorrow. We're thinking about this. It's kind of terror, but it might be workplace violence too. This idea that we are somehow not sure what it is anymore. It's like someone's attacking you. You're not sure if it's a bad thing. The guy out at Fort Hood kills 16 people. Well, we're not sure.
Or workplace violence.
It's workplace violence. Yeah, we don't want to let them get any money from this. So we'll call it workplace violence, and therefore the families of the people that got killed and hurt, they won't get any money back from the government on that. That's great. I was reading on your website here. It said when speaking to a friend about this book, she asked, why would the author give the bad guys this terrible plan for attack? That's an extremely naive question. You said terrorists don't need our help to come up with ways to attack us. They've been working on this for themselves for a long time. I thought that myself every now and then. Why would you say this? And I've had people actually say that to me. I said, do you think I'm the first person to think about this? I mean, really, isn't that kind of an arrogant way of looking at it? The fact is, terrorists are thinking about any way they can get into the country. It's like when we're on immigration. Well, there's no evidence that terrorists are coming across the board. Really? You think they've given it any consideration or thought? Do you think maybe they've already done it with our kind of blasé attitude about that? So this idea that you're the first one to think of this is outrageous.
Well, in the mid-1930s, the Navy did an exercise of sending a couple of carriers near Pearl Harbor, launching and simulating a strike. And then the reaction was, never happened. Don't worry about it. All right? Well, it sure as hell happened about 4 years later.
Yeah.
It's the terrorists, these guys are professionals. They really do make Al-Qaeda look like amateurs. And for the President of the United States to refer to them as the JV team, remember he said that only several months back, Al-Qaeda ISIS makes the Nazis look like Quakers.
Yeah, I mean,
we are at war, and we better darn well wake up to it.
I would be showing pictures every day of these upside-down crucifixions that they're having, the killings, the beheadings. It would be out there. And when people did see the beheadings in this country, it did wake people up. And you mentioned in your writings here that the methods of terror practiced by ISIS could be a shock our nation might never overcome. The storm is coming. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when, and we must prepare for it now. Final thoughts here in writing your book. What do we have to do to prepare for it right now? Do we become a police state? Is there some other things we need to do? What kind of things do we need to do to be on guard here, Bill?
Well, we have 2 hours left.
Yeah, I always ask that question right the last minute left. Yeah.
In 20 seconds are left. The federal government is bumbling along like a giant, and we have to start thinking locally, county, state level. We do have to rethink school security immediately.
Yeah.
Immediately. There are 98,000 public schools in America. If we act locally, that is a crucial thing.
Right.
And that means talking with your parents should be bombarding their school boards and their local police with, how do you protect the school now? And don't tell me some bloody sticker is going to make the difference.
Yeah.
We have to rethink security at particularly places of worship, churches and synagogues. Mm-hmm. ISIS hates Christians and Jews. Yeah. They said they're going to kill us all. Well, isn't a church or a synagogue the perfect way to hit us? We have to rethink security, and we got an election coming up in 2 weeks. We should be demanding of the people we're electing from local to national, when are you going to wake up? And don't give me some lousy campaign promise.
Day of Wrath. We hope it's not coming, but you better be ready in case it does. And William Forstchen is the author of that. Again, they can pick it up out there. Is there any particular place you'd like to go to pick up that book, Bill?
Just about anywhere. If you want the paper version, you can walk into a B&N. If they don't have it there, they can order it, or you can go on Amazon or almost any distributor website. Don't
just pick it up, but pay for it too. I mean, but we got the idea. No, hey, great stuff this morning. Thank you so much. I have not had the book yet, but I have read reviews of it. I will be reading it starting this weekend, and I'm looking forward to it. Bill, thanks so much for joining us on the Gary Sutton Show.
And thank you for getting the word out.
What's that? Well, not a problem at all. I mean, the word needs to get out right now, but we'll talk again. Thanks so much, Bill. Take care.
God bless.
Take care. Day of Wrath, William Forstchen, Forstchen. If you want to read that book, I'd get my hands on it. It's a novel, but it talks about real-time stuff.